What's up, guys? Nick Skrip here on the Fantrax channel, as well as the P2W Fantasy Podcast. Trying to go a little bit more consistently with the podcast heading into the NFL season. Myself, been plugging tons and tons of content in various forms. You can find my articles on the Fantrax website, on Twitter or X. I do a daily post there. Tons of TikToks, tons of YouTube. Just really getting after it as we're getting closer to the NFL season. Super stoked to see if my takes hit or miss or somewhere in between. But today, we're not just talking about players. We're going to talk about some strategy that comes with fantasy football. And for some people, they may hear some of the topics on this podcast and think, hey, this sounds pretty elementary, things that I know already. But I feel like there are little tidbits here that you might overlook or don't really think about as often. And there's some people that don't really pay attention to fantasy football 365 days a year, like some degenerates like myself. So you have the casual fan, you have the guys that are year-round fans, but hopefully you can take something away from this podcast. We'll get it going right now.
To win, no fear to give. I feel, but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win. I play to win, yeah, I play to win. I play to win, oh, play to win. I play to win, yeah, I play to win. I play to win.
Talking fantasy football strategy for redraft leagues. Starting off with drafting tips. So first and foremost, come prepared with tiered rankings so you can pivot in your draft and understand when to take who. So a straight list of players is a good thing to have sometimes, but also when you tier players, that breaks them off into groups, because sometimes your 10th ranked wide receiver and your 11th ranked wide receiver don't necessarily need to go, back to back in drafts. As we get deeper in the drafts, that truly applies. So come prepared with some rankings, because what happens in drafts usually is unexpected, round to round, and it's a good way to prepare yourself for the unexpected. Understand that every draft is different. There's a lot of people that put out mock drafts, myself included, into the industry. There's a lot of people that actively mock draft before their drafts, but at the end of the day, every draft is different. You can have 3 drafts that have the same league settings, and for example, Patrick Mahomes might go in the 3rd round of one draft, the 6th round of another draft, and the 2nd round of one. It's different league to league, because there's different managers who value things different, that come in with different strategies. Some pay attention a lot, some don't. So understand that every draft is different, and being prepared for your draft helps you improvise when the unexpected happens. Play the board. Understand what other people are doing in the draft. That can impact your picks. Let's say you are in the middle of your pick 10, right? You have 11, and after you have 9 before you. If both of those guys have a quarterback in a 1-quarterback league, maybe you can play that, right? Maybe you don't have to necessarily take a quarterback right away after they both have one, because they probably will delay their next one. You can kind of play the board of what the guys around you do and what falls to you. That goes hand in hand with drafting the best player available. A lot of people are hyper focused on filling their lineups at the end of the day, but you want a fantasy football roster with the highest valued players. Everything else will sort itself out. You can trade, you can pick up guys on the waiver wire. I'd rather have the best valued team than the best starting lineup, because we see very often a mixture of things. 1, a player loses his starting job. 2, an injury occurs. 3, the team scheme is different than what you expected. We saw that with Atlanta last year. They had a bunch of playmakers. The passing volume wasn't necessarily there. There's a lot of impacts and variables that can, change and alter your starting lineup. So don't hyper focus on building the best starting lineup. I would focus on building the best possible fantasy football roster. Worry about the lineup last. Worry about that lineup before week 1, not right now. Get your guys. A lot of people say that, and it sounds cliche, but it's easier to get your guys in the draft than it is to trade for them, because odds are, if somebody reaches for one of your guys, that that manager most likely liked that player just as much of, as you, if not more. So, I think people hesitate to take a guy around early sometimes, especially in the middle parts of the draft, because you think, hey, it's going to be a reach. I'm not being smart with valuation. But at the end of the day, if you truly believe in a guy based off of your own research, what he did for you last year, the opportunity, what your favorite analyst said, then get your guy at the end of the day, because later on to go get that guy via a trade, much different. Last with drafting, fill your bench with dart throws for upside over safe plays. I'd rather have guys on my bench that could potentially have a really big role versus like have a solidified, very safe vanilla role. I'd rather have a guy that has the potential, if things go his way, to score 18, 20 fantasy points versus a guy that will give you 8 to 10 consistently, right? Those guys don't win you matchups. I think your safer plays can be guys in the middle rounds, right? But later in drafts, I'm tossing darts at guys that could find a way to be big impacts on their team. They're just not valued that way. You look at some examples like a Josh Palmer, right, for the Chargers. He could have a very big role, but just because he doesn't have like a history of high draft capital and being a consistent fantasy starter, he's not being valued very high, but the potential is there. And we've seen him score high for fantasy points, through multiple weeks in the past when given the opportunity. He has a nice opportunity now. So look for those sort of guys. Handcuffs, when we talk about handcuffs, look at that handcuff. Just because they are the handcuff doesn't mean if they got all of the work, they would be good for fantasy football. I think that's how you can differentiate handcuff to handcuff. So those running back twos on a team that you want to stash, if this guy gets the work, can he be very fantasy relevant? That's the question you should ask yourself. So beyond drafting, let's get into the waiver wire. Be aggressive early. Imagine passing on Puka Nacua last year because you did not want to waste your fab, right? There was a lot of people that told me, hey, I had a nice opportunity to pick up Puka. He was on my waivers after week 1. I didn't want to spend too much money because I didn't want to waste it all on one player, or I didn't want to waste too much of it too early. I'd say be more aggressive early on, because the first handful of weeks in your fantasy football season, all 12 managers, if it's a 12-person league, are actively utilizing that waiver wire, right? There's a lot of people putting bids on a lot of players. As the season goes on, what happens? What happens is half the league or a quarter of the league realizes, hey, I'm not making playoffs this year in redraft. So knowing they don't make playoffs, that makes people less active, especially when it comes to the waiver wire. So later on in the season, you obviously want to be aggressive when you're in the playoff hunt and you want to pick up the best players. Yes, but it's a different competition via the waiver wire later on in the season because less managers are making those moves to go and pick guys up. So understand early on, everybody's playing. Later on, teams kind of dwindle out. Pay attention to things like snap percentages, targets, depth charts, etc. A guy might have a big week where he had 2 catches for 100 yards, but he only played 20% of the snaps. Can that guy's snap percentage increase the next week? Maybe, but more so, it's probably more likely that guy just had a spike week. You look at like Marvin Mims, the rookie from last year on the Broncos. He had these really, really big spike weeks by catching like 2 balls for 100 plus yards, but never did he really carve out a substantial role. While there's other guys that were on the waiver wires that increasingly, earned a role. Look at like, everybody loves and, is in love with Dontavian Wicks. He didn't play a lot to start the season, but he gradually earned a role. Look at Trey McBride. He wasn't a starter for X amount of weeks, but we saw him earn a role. And if you paid attention to Trey McBride's snap percentage, you would see that it started to increase. And that was a big indicator that, hey, this guy has a role. So there's more context to performances. So when it comes to the waiver wire, yes, be aggressive. Understand that many managers are playing it early on, but also on the same note, pay attention to the context details. Let's talk about trading. Here's an exercise that I like to go through. Some people have knocked this exercise, but I think it's very straightforward. So identify your team need. What does your team need to be more competitive? What does your team need to be a winning roster? Then identify who can fill that team need. So let's say I'm lacking at the running back position. I scan my league. Some guys are right there with me. Some guys have a surplus of running backs. I would identify those teams that might have a surplus of running backs. But then you have to identify their team needs and how you can address it. If a team manager has Mark Andrews sending Kyle Pitts or a Pat Fryermuth or a Jake Ferguson to that roster for a piece you need, probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you truly have to identify what can be an incentive for that manager to give me their player at the end of the day. Send that offer, communicate the offer. It could be a text, it could be in the league chat, it could be a DM. Just say, hey, got an offer here. What do you think about it? Sometimes that turns into counters. Sometimes it turns into them instantly rejecting it. Sometimes it turns into them accepting it right away. And then you just follow up. You follow up at the end of the day. But the main thing here, prioritize making your team better versus winning trades. Everybody likes to post their trades to Twitter or X or any other social site or in a group chat and say, hey, did I win this trade? Hey, who won this trade? I truly don't give a shit if I won or lost a trade. I care if my team got better. Now, I'm not going to take a massive L where I'm just tossing away value, but I am much more concerned as a fantasy manager of my team getting better than me winning a trade, because I'll lose a trade all day if my team gets better and wins a championship. Maybe that's just me. The IR. So actively utilize the IR spots every week. So some teams, some leagues, I should say, have 2 or 3 IR spots. If you could place players on those IR spots after your draft, what does that mean? Let's say we just had our league draft. I picked up a guy that I can put on the IR, and everybody's league settings are different. If a guy's on the PUP, in some leagues, you can put them on the IR. If they are listed as out during an active week, during a game or right before a game, you can put them on the IR in some leagues. If they are actually on the IR, obviously they can go on the IR. But after your draft, you can put those players on the IR, and then you can hit that waiver wire, right? You could beat the waiver wire rush that coming week. Same thing right before a game during the season, right? It's Sunday morning. I see one of my players are out for the week. I can't tell you how many managers and leagues I play in, just home leagues, will have players that are, eligible for the IR, and they don't put them on the IR. And you're wasting the potential of you beating the waiver wire rush that following week. So hypothetically, I put a guy that is out that week on my IR, and then I go take a random dart throw at a running back that is on the waiver wire. Then that Sunday, the starter of that team of the running back that I just picked up goes down. That Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, everybody would be thinking, hey, I want to pick up the running back 2 on that team. But guess what? I already beat the IR. I already beat the waiver wire rush by utilizing my IR effectively. So I think there's a lot of strategy that gets overlooked because people kind of casually go through the motions. And you don't have to sit there and hyper focus on all of your fantasy football moves all the time. But I think if you pay attention, you can put, separate yourself. And that comes to drafting, like we talked about before, the waiver wire, trading, the IR, etc. So very quick topics. This was a quick podcast, but I think that, with people not actively playing fantasy football year round, some people being casual fans, these are good topics to touch base on. At the end of the day, small moves and small advantages and small separations in your league could be the separating factor of you winning a matchup, making the playoffs, winning your league. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and have a nice day.